Hello and welcome to our final episode of the intro series for now. We are going to be practicing everything we learned. This application isn't built quite the right way, but I'm really more focused on just getting more reps in with everything that we've covered. And this application will use everything that we covered, except for a couple of the modules, but for the most part, it covers all of the basics from A to Z again. So the first thing I want you to do is come into the storeitems.py, make this file, and for this I am using kind of just a little imaginary customer item type setup where people are entering the store, buying items, leaving the store, something like that, and we're getting user input. And again, the flow of the app is not going to make much sense as any kind of a practical app. We're just practicing everything that we're doing, so we need something to do with that. If you want to do all of this on your own, I do recommend you try. And if you get stuck on anything, come back to the video and look at the solutions, because I'll be going over these one by one, filling them all in, and then we will start building the application. And we're going to be using two different files here. So make a storeitems.py file and an introexercises.py file. I will link the GitHub repository in the description below, so if you want, you can just go look at the solutions and work through them that way, or you can download the empty introexercises.py file. The storeitems.py file is already completed because this is just holding some data objects for us, and we're going to go ahead and build those now. But if you want to try those first and name them whatever you want, please do that. Fill this out, hit pause, come back here, and we'll work through them together if you are stuck on anything. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is make a tuple, and I'm just going to be filling this out so that it's quick from the solutions. So the first thing I did is I make this tuple called free items. And remember, tuples have those curved brackets on them, and it's just one value. There's not a key value pair. Next, we're going to build a set. And remember, sets use the curly brackets just like a dictionary. The difference is we're not using key value pairs in a set, and that sets are unique. So just remember that. So here we have our set. We see the curly brackets, and it's all unique values in here. Then we're going to build a list. Lists are the square brackets. Make sure you put at least 3 items in your list. And again, not key value pairs, just values for this list. Although remember that you can put other objects inside of objects, and that's what we're going to do here with this dictionary. So we have build a dictionary where the key is an int that corresponds to the index, and the value is a dictionary containing the following data as key value pairs. So we're going to have a dictionary with a nested dictionary. Inside the nested dictionary, we'll have a name, a price, a quantity, and an in stock. So that way we can practice the string, the float, the integer value, and booleans. So this is going to be our expensive items list. And this is more of a like the data object that you would actually see in something you're getting from like an API or something like that. As you can see, it's JSON, right? We've covered JSON. So dictionaries are JSON. That's usually what you get. And you'll usually get kind of a mixture of a list and dictionaries in most APIs. Then we want to unpack the list. So this one, this moderate items, we're going to use that unpack ability of Python, and we're going to unpack it into individual variables. We'll just name those X, Y, and Z, and that's pretty straightforward. So that's our whole storeitems.py file for now. Now we'll go over here into the intro exercises, and we'll start filling this out. Alright, so I filled out all of the instructions for this file that we're going to be doing. If you go onto the GitHub that's in the description again, I have this version which is empty, and then I have a solution version which is not empty. So do whichever one you feel more comfortable with. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to call a storeitems.py file a module, and we want to import that module, and we want to rename it. So if you remember, we just do that as import storeitems, and then we can just call it whatever variable we want. We are going to use S in this case for store items, so it's simple. And you don't even have to do that typically. We're just practicing how we import something and rename it, because with some modules you definitely want to do it, which you'll see in upcoming videos as we dive in. Now we're going to assign excuse me, the data objects that we built, and we are going to assign those from the module. So the data objects that we had were free items, cheap items, moderate items, and expensive items. And we'll just import them like this. If you do not do the S and you just try to do the expensive items and stuff, it won't work. And if you do S, it will give you that key tip, remember, right here. So if you do like S dot, it'll show everything that you have in VS Code, which is always nice to have. Then we want to print one of those unpacked variables that we did. So if we come over here in the store items, we come down to what we unpacked. We labeled them X, Y, and Z, which corresponds to this list here. Yep, right here. So we have energy drinks, sandwiches, and beer. So if we come here, we can just print one, just print, and I'm just printing the string I unpacked, and I'm concatenating it with s.x because we assigned it to that variable inside of that module. So you could also import everything and then unpack it here. XYZ equals moderate items, s.moderate items, right? You could unpack it here and then print it as well, if that's something you want to do. Now we want to ask for user input to get their name, first and last name, and we want to assign that to a variable. So we do the input, we put the string that we want the user to see, and then whatever the user enters, we're assigning to this variable full name. Now we want to use the split method that we've seen to cut the string into the first and last name. And remember, if they enter a first and last name, and we're not doing any error checking, it won't work if they don't enter at least two different, I guess, words or characters separated by a space into the input, right? That'll make the app crash or have an error. So we're not worrying about checking for that right now, because we just want to practice this input method and then the first and last name. So we can assign those as well using split here, and we'll split on the space and any other spaces in case they ramble on for whatever reason. And we just want the first and the second object that are in there, the first and second elements, so at index 0 and index 1, right? So as we split it, remember, it turns it into different elements, and so we're grabbing the first element and the second element in there. And then we want to capitalize the first letter in each name, and remember, Python makes that really easy. You could, if you want to build your own method and you want to think about how capitalize works, you can mess around with that, because it does involve splitting and rejoining them. And to upper, we have that method, remember, where we can take a letter and turn it to the uppercase version, but remember that upper does everything, so it will do the entire word. So if we don't use capitalize and we were to use upper, we would get fully capitalized words back, not just the first letter. Now I'm capitalizing them first cap and last cap, first name capitalized, last name capitalized, just so that we keep it very, very simple. And I'm breaking this up. You can do a lot of stuff in one line of code, just so you know. So, and you will do it that way, so it's easier to read and it takes up a lot less space. But I'm breaking everything down as we work through this so that we can use each individual part. Now we want to return a string and concatenate it using the plus operator to say this string. So the first name and last name are our variables that we want to plug in based off of the user input here that we have with the first cap and last cap. And so we do that by just printing. We'll copy that exact string that I put here, and we'll replace first name and last name, and we'll concatenate them here with the plus operators, just like we did above. Next, we want to add user input in the CLI, which stands for command line interface, which is what we're always typing in the terminal, and we want to assign that to a variable. So this is going to be asking them what kind of item they want to get. And so we'll just assign that to the variable name item to get, and we'll just say, would you like a free, cheap, moderate, or expensive item? Now, normally you wouldn't code anything with this many comments. I'm doing it obviously as a way to give you each thing broken up so that you can break down any kind of complexity into small problems, which when you are programming something, that's what I recommend. If I just tell you to go code an application that tracks a bunch of data from helicopters, right? Like that's a gigantic problem if I just hand it to you like that. But if I break down that problem into steps, it's a lot easier to work through. I think that you can accomplish all of these steps. So that's why I have so many comments and instructions in this. You won't see that in any kind of production app. Hopefully people comment their code if it's at all confusing, or at least tell you where it's pulling things from so that you don't have to read the entire code stack just to understand that. So, or code base. So we're going to build an if, elif, and else to handle user input and check the user input string equality with a comparison operator, so that double equals. And remember, if you just use a single equals, you'll be assigning values, so be careful of that. That could cause errors. I do urge that you try everything on your own, but hopefully you downloaded this and have been trying it, and then we're stepping through it. So we'll build this. We're going to see if item to get equals free, and then if so, we want to print an item from the tuple by index because the tuple is containing our free items inside this storeItems.py. And you can just choose any of them to return here. I'll just do index of 0. Normally you'd want something more dynamic, and if you want, you can practice that on your own. Feel free. And then here we're going to do the elif statement, right? And because we have 4 different things, we have free, cheap, moderate, and expensive, we're going to need 2 elif statements, and we're going to need 2 other statements, the if and the else. So here we'll actually just add this now just to illustrate that. So we know that if we get free, cheap, moderate, or expensive, that we have to do something. So we'll bring this one down here and put it there. So now if we have cheap, cheap is a set. So remember, indexing and slicing don't work in sets like they do with the other objects. Like you can't just do cheap 0, 1 or a 0 here or 1 by index. It won't work. So there is a way to iterate over sets. We actually cover that later, and you might remember it, which is that every one of these objects has the dunder iter method built into them, so you can iterate over them. And then we're going to print the moderate. Again, pick whatever one you want. I'm going to go with 2, and make sure that if you're getting any errors, you're trying to run this and you're getting any errors, make sure that this index value actually corresponds to something in your store items file. Otherwise you will get an error for that. And then here what we want is we actually want an if then, because it says extra credit, check the dict item to see if it returns a true or false Boolean value and modify the output accordingly. Our Boolean value, so right here it says it, in the case of my example, it would be checking if the item is in stock. So remember, in here we have this in stock value, and it's assigned a Boolean of true or true. If it's true, then we want to return that, and if it's not, then we don't want to return that. We want to tell the user that item sold out or some kind of other error message. So here we have this, and if you see this indentation, I'm kind of hinting at you that maybe something should be nested. So we'll do this. We'll just pass in expensive. We'll give it index of 1, and then remember we can check for the key in a dictionary by passing it in. Our key in this case is in stock right here. So we're seeing if in stock is true. We'll check it. If it is true, then here's what we want it to do, and we want it to print that item. And again, if you really want to practice this stuff and get it solidified in your head, you can change this if, elif statement to actually look for the index inside of those data objects and only return it if that specific index is in there. I'm just hard coding everything in because we're just practicing the if else statement itself. And then inside of this, remember, if you have an if, we need an else or something to end it, right? So then we wanted to print that message to the user that the item is sold out. Otherwise, the user will just be completely confused because this will just execute, and if it's this else, it won't tell them anything. And then you can always build in here. We have this for our elifs, right? We have our 3 elif statements, our if statement. And then if it's none of that, if the user doesn't input any of these things, if they don't type free, cheap, moderate, or expensive, we'll just pass for the sake of our app. That way we don't crash the app if they put something else in. We'll just say pass. If they have a typo or whatever, just come down here and just pass. Okay, now we'll make a list of imaginary clients. We'll call these customers, and we'll just pass in 4 string names here. And then we'll build a method that loops over the list and prints each of them so that we can practice that. And remember, when we build a method, we start with def. So we'll build this, and we want to call it whatever you want, something that makes sense. This is printing the customers, so I'm going to name it print customers. I'm going to pass in customers here, and I actually rather do it this way. So we have it here. It's going to print customers, and remember, we can loop in Python by just saying for whatever we want to call it, cust in customers, right? So you could even do customer, right? Makes more sense probably. For customer in customers, for each customer we want to print this string, and we're just going to concatenate that customer's name in there. So when we run it, we'll see customer Ashley entered the store. And then we're going to come down here and we'll execute that method and pass in any of the arguments, right? So if we don't pass in this customer list, this won't execute properly. So make sure when you call the method, we're passing in customers. Okay, now we want to write a lambda method that multiplies an argument by 0.07. This is simulating like a sales tax thing. So we'll call it taxable here, and this is the syntax for the lambda. Remember, we're telling Python, hey, this is a lambda function. So A stands for argument, so whatever argument we call into the lambda function, we're going to multiply that by 0.07 to find the taxable value. Now we're going to assign the price of an item in our dict to a variable. So since we've been using that dictionary item at index 1 here, and up here we were doing it by name, here we want to do it by price. So we'll assign that based on the price, and then we'll be able to find the tax amount for this item by doing this. We'll just call that taxable function, that lambda function up here. So we'll make tax, pass in price here. It will call this function. It will multiply this price by 0.07, and it will store that in this tax variable for us to use as tax. And now we can add the tax and the original price for the total price and print that total price. It says extra credit. We can use format to make sure only 2 decimals are returned. So we'll go ahead and do that in steps. So the first thing we want to do is do the total, and then we'll just make a text string here because this is what we're going to format. So you want to make your text string, and remember, you want to tell it what you're formatting here. You want to tell Python what you're formatting, and then we'll be able to print by doing text.format price equaling total, right? We're passing in a variable argument here to make this string dynamic, and then we're telling it to do it to the 2 floating points, right? So that's the second decimal. That's what this decimal 2 floating point number is. It will chop off anything past that for the proper price formatting. And then remember that you can always use ceiling or floor to round if needed, and to import the math module. So if you want to do that to get some practice, remember to import math up top, and you can build that in. And I would recommend at that point probably building a function that does all of this and then calling that function, right? And then just assigning that to the variable or whatever, and then printing that. That's the way that I would build that out. Now we want to practice our while loops. So we're going to build a while loop that pops customers from the list And we're going to assign that, the popped customer, to a variable, and we're going to print the customer that we popped and stop when the list is empty so that our while loop doesn't just continue to run forever. So remember, if you accidentally do that, you can always Control-C out. So first we want to define our while loop here. So we're doing it based on the length of the customers array that we built up here, or list that we built up here, which has 4 people in it. And so as long as it's greater than 0, we want it to run. And then we're just going to say that these customers are leaving the store. So we'll call it the variable leaving, and we'll pop off the customer on each iteration of the loop. And then when we do that, we'll just print that leaving, so this customer's name is leaving the store. So this will just do Ashley, then Dan, Dustin, then Aaron. All right, now we want to build a customer class, and we want to remember to give them that customer init. So we'll come in here and do this. We have our class customer. Remember, it's double underscore, and remember that your first argument should always be self inside of this, and that's because this is the class object, but we want instances of that class as we make them. So you want to make sure that it's assigning it to the instance, not the total class. Make a customer, so we'll assign our first customer here, and we'll just call it C1, and we have to pass in only the name and age. Remember, we don't have to pass in self. It will do that automatically, so we just do customer, and remember to capitalize your classes here. And we'll pass in Billy, and we'll give Billy the age of 12. Now it says to print the customer's name and age, and we can do that in one line here. And just remember, if you wanted to add anything, like you want to add your own custom text and you're getting an error, it's because this is an integer. So just remember, if you're printing it, integers don't concatenate with strings. So we can't do like print Billy is plus C1.age plus years old. You'll get an error. You can convert stuff to different data types if you remember. You can do like str and pass in an integer or whatever. Remember, we can change the data types of anything in Python. So now we want to add a customer method to the class that says my name is and uses their name. We'll do this in the base class and call that function here. So if any of these steps sound complicated, if you're reading through these, just break them down into parts. Add a customer method to our class. This is our only class. So we want to come in here and add a custom method, customer method, excuse me, and it will just, all it is, it will say my name is, and then use their name. So we'll just call this greeting, and we'll just pass in self, remember, because that self object is what's going to store their name. You want it to call it on the instance. And then it will say, hello, my name is, plus self.name, which we've assigned up here, based off this variable that we passed in when we built the class. So Billy, when we call customer, hits here, it hits up to this name, then it drops down here and assigns to this instance self.name. So then when we call it on the instance, it will say self.name, right? So now we want to call greeting on our class. We named it C1 here, and it says call the function. So we'll call greeting, which is what we named it. We don't have to pass self in, remember, because it doesn't need to be. We're calling, the self is already built into this C1 object, and we want to execute that function or method. Now we want to modify the customer age and print it. So we'll do C1.age, we'll change it, and we'll print C1.age. Now make a child class that inherits from the customer class. Remember, you can pass to give it the same attributes only. So we build this customer class, and we pass in customer here so that it knows that this customer class is the parent of customer child. And then we'll just pass. We don't need anything special in the customer child. That's just practicing inheritance here. Now we want to use the child to create another instance. So we'll name this one C2, and we'll pass in new values here. So we'll pass in Tammy, and we'll make her 50. And then we want to use the greeting function from this parent class, use the parents function on the child. So we'll do C2 greeting just like we did with C1, and because customer child is a child of customer, it will still function fine. Alright, now we want to make an iterator for the tuple, and in my example the tuple is free. Lists, tuples, and dictionaries and sets are all iterable in this fashion. So remember, above we were talking about how you can't call the index because certain data objects, right, make it difficult up here. So remember, we printed the entire set instead of calling the index. You can iterate over them in this way. So the first thing we're going to do, if you remember, we have my iterator, and then we can do iterator here and pass in whatever data object we want. We're going to pass in the tuple of free, and then we want to print a few values. So remember, that one's just repeating the print function over and over and using the next keyword here on this object, which executes iter free. So you could also just type in iter free a bunch, but it's better to do this. You want to apply or assign things to variables, and you could even assign this to a variable and then just call it multiple times or put it in its own function, whatever you want to do. Alright, now we're going to practice scope. We're going to make a method that has a global variable inside of it, so we want the global keyword, and assign it a value to that variable. Alright, so we'll just name our method here scope check. We don't need to pass anything in. We want that global keyword. We'll name it the clever name, I'm a global variable. I'm a global var. We'll set to 100. So we'll assign that value to that variable here. And now we'll go ahead and call that method, which it doesn't have any arguments, so we don't need to pass anything in. And then we want to print the variable outside of the method. So here. So just remember that when you're doing anything like this, the order of the code is important. You want to make sure that the variable is assigned prior to calling it. So we don't want to print I'm a global var somewhere else. We want to make sure that everything is in order. Okay, import the regex module at the top. It is called RE. So we come all the way up top again, and we'll import RE. Now we come back down, and we want to make a variable with a string value. So we'll just call ours random text here. Very clever. Now we want to use regex to search for any matching words in the string. So regex gives you that dot search method to do that, but you want to assign it to a variable so that we can check it. And it takes two arguments. The first arguments are what you're going to search for, and the second argument is what string you're going to search for those. So here we'll look for this capitalized at the beginning, and we'll look for string period at the end. And remember, you have to pass the period in. So if you were doing this and you're getting none back right here, see, then you need to check your work. And it's usually because the period's left out. And I don't say that here because I want you, if you're working on your own, working through this, I want you to really try to shoot these bugs yourself, because if you can get good at hunting down bugs and reading error messages, that's an absolutely crucial skill. Alright, and that brings us to our final step here, which is we're going to build a try except finally block and have it return an error. This is the last thing our application does, and feel free to play around with it. So for this one, I built a variable giraffe. I assigned it the value of none, so it won't be able to print giraffe. It will come here and it will do the finally block of the try except is finished, because it will run through that. So none doesn't give an error directly, so it doesn't say something went wrong actually. It just won't print anything, and then it will just tell us that the try except block finished. So it'll be nothing, nothing, and print this. If you assign giraffe a value and want to mess around with it and you make it where it has an error, then it will print this error and it will print the finally, because remember, finally always runs with the try except blocks. So just have some fun, mess around with this, see if you can break your own app. And then to run it, of course, we just come into new terminal, make sure you're in the right folder here, And then remember to, we've been naming everything numbers, but you want to run the actual file, right? So we'll run this. It's asking our first and last name. We'll lowercase them to test to see if it uppercases them. It does. It says your first name is Bob and your last name is Bob. It asks us what kind of item we'd like. We'll just say free. And then you see we get everything printed. So after we say free, it tells us straw. Straws are free. Then it loops over in our while loop. And then it stops looping, which is what we want from the while loop. It does the total and the tax. Let's see if that calculated at all correctly. It's 1176, it says. And what was the item that we passed in? It was pizza, 10.99 here. So yes, it added sales tax to that, which is good, and 0.7% sales tax, it looks like. Then it says that everyone's leaving the store. That's our pop. If you remember when we were popping people off, we made that string that says people are leaving. Then we made the object of Billy. We changed Billy's age to 22 after he greets us. Billy ages 10 years by saying hello to us. Then we built the child of the customer class. We named that Tammy. We used the greeting from the parent class. Hello, my name's Tammy. And then here we have the free again. I don't actually know what's printing that one. Oh, it's the iter. Okay. So it's printing straw, then napkin. So it's iterating through the free data store here, right? So we have free items, straw, napkin, and then it would go ketchup if we did another row of it, right? And then we have this scope global variable, and we're calling scope check, and then we're printing it after we call scope check, which creates this global variable of 100, right? And then we build our regex string here. We're searching if there is a matching thing, and if there is, we should get something back. Otherwise, we'll get none back. So if regex does not find these exact matches, it will return none. We print regex search, and that's what we get here, is this regex.match object. So it's telling us the span, the match. Remember, it has those values that we can get that we've seen before. And then we come down here to our try except finally block. Try can't print anything because there is nothing. Except doesn't see an error because it's not an error-worthy value. It's just none. And then so it prints the finally block, which is what we see. All right, feel free to practice as much or as little, or make this actually a decent functioning store app, something that makes a lot more sense, where the user can input which items they want. It checks. You could add where it modifies the in-stock value by subtracting quantity. If quantity equals 0, it changes this to false. You could add to make sure that the name input is valid input from the user. You could say if like the first name and last name are not both entered, you return an error. You could do all kinds of stuff. So feel free to play around with it. If you have any trouble or any questions, or you're not getting it to run the way I am, this is up on the GitHub repository. So if something's a little different, and I know we went through this really quick, you can go up on that GitHub repository and compare your code, and you can just, maybe it's just one line and you didn't do something. Maybe you forgot like a colon somewhere when you were typing along, whatever it is. But I urge you to try to do all of this on your own. Even if you watch this through once, maybe go back and see if you can now do it on your own after you've had this little refresher. So thank you for watching, and we will be moving on to the module, and I don't know how it's pronounced. It's TK Inter, like Tinctor. And what it does is it allows us to build a GUI, a graphical user interface, in Python. So it's pretty cool. I've actually never used it. I want to use it, so we're going to explore that.